This is The Collective Voice, and you're tuning in to Faith Transitions,
exploring the challenges and opportunities at the crossroads of ministry and innovation.
Greetings all, welcome to this episode of Faith Transitions. Today is a fun day. We have Alexandra joining us, and Alexandra is a transition in and of herself. We at the 787 Collective have been in a bit of space of transition because the beloved Jade, who many of you have known as if you listen to the podcast and have been experiencing events and things with us in the collective, Jade is out for the summer. And so while she is out, we have Alexandra coming in to be our interim assistant director. And so we're thrilled to have Alexandra here with us for the next few months over the course of the summer. So if you're engaging with us, whether that's through the podcast or whether that's events that we're doing on campus or around the Austin area, or if you are existing in our Mighty Network, if you don't know what the Mighty Network is, well, maybe you should, but it's our digital community where you can be a part of the collective in a digital space as well. But you'll just see Alexandra's name popping up all over the place because she's graciously decided to come and join us for the summer and be a part of the work that we're doing here. And when we sat and had dinner a couple months ago, you seemed very excited about the opportunity to engage in young adult ministry once again and work with young adults. And part of that is because of your history in the past of what you've been involved in through ministry. But I don't want to tell your story for you. Really, what I want to do is bring you on the podcast today to share a little bit about who you are and what you're, again, that background part of it, but really what you're engaged in now and kind of the hope of what you are hoping for young adults in faith formation in the future. So Alexandra, welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you. Yeah. I am really excited to be here. I love what the collective does, and I have enjoyed getting to get connected to ministry that's specifically for young adults, mostly because it can feel kind of lonely sometimes as a young adult who is active in ministry, whether as a layperson or as someone who's like on staff. I have been in some kind of ministry my entire time as a young adult, basically. I would say actually the last couple of years is probably the time I've stepped away from formally in kind of an employment sense, been a part of ministry. But I have my MDiv from Duke. I lived in North Carolina. And then my husband decided to get his MDiv because I made it look like a really good time. And so
it's just so easy, right? It's just a casual degree totally.
Yeah, just 3 years of your life. Just go get it done. Not a big deal.
I was talking to a young adult the other day who was like, all my friends who are doing like these business master's degrees and they're like 1 year, 2 year. And she's like, no, this is like a 3-year intense program that just don't understand. Like, why is it taking you so long to get your master's? It's a little different.
Yes. The professional master's degrees are a whole different ballgame.
It's not easy to master divinity, apparently. Who knew?
Well, so far it's been a challenge. I will say that. So I have kind of done a little bit of everything while I've been in ministry. I've done everything from camping ministry, which is kind of where I got started as a young adult. I think that's kind of common to go and be like, I obviously want to go spend time with children at a camp over the summer. Older young adult me maybe doesn't have the energy for that, but 19-year-old me thought it was a great idea.
Amen to that.
And so since then, I have kind of done a smattering of a little bit of everything. I worked for a nonprofit that worked with people experiencing homelessness for several years. I was the assistant director of a nonprofit in Durham. And so I've kind of done the nonprofit side. I've also worked for, I would have to be at least 8-9 churches, I would say. I've worked for churches in South Africa. I've worked for churches in Australia, and I've worked for churches all over in different places in the US and all kinds of different denominations. So if you want to come to me and just have a casual conversation, I will be invested because I probably I have some weird story about that. But right now, I ended up in Austin, which is not a place I ever planned to be, to get my PhD in religious studies. So I can't escape religion, apparently, in my professional or personal life.
You're mastering divinity, and now you're also going to go ahead and get a PhD in religion, too. That seems not an overachiever whatsoever here.
Yes. And as of this May, at my point in the program, I officially got my second master's degree in religion, which I did not need, but have achieved. And so at this point, I feel like I've mastered religion. Now I'm just going to be the doctorate in religion is all that's left.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I just thought one master's degree. I'm like, why stop there? Why not do more mastering? So, in my PhD work, I study American Christianity, and what I specifically study is things around bodies. But in particular, I'm invested in questions about what it looks like to talk about bodies in kind of an American culture that's obsessed with health and obsessed with how health is linked to the appearance of the body. And so I do a lot of work around body size. I do a lot of work around gender and sexuality, and the kind of ways that, a body is an embodied experience. It's also intersectional. So, race, gender, sexuality, and then also body size. And that's kind of the thing in my research that I kind of bring to an area of thinking about what it's like to exist within an American culture that's Christian in ways that are sometimes not helpful. And also how then that's navigated within kind of people who are actively a part of church communities. And so, there's been some great work done that's kind of on the more practical side. That's a book recently came out that's called Fat Church that actually talks about sort of some of more of the practicalities about what does it look like to be an affirming space for people of various body sizes and to kind of see them all as equally valid and morally okay. For me, I'm kind of less drawn to the practical. And tend to be more drawn to what is the kind of theology and philosophy of both American culture and American Christian kind of theology and thought and history that sort of has led to the place that we're in, where churches have really particular ways usually of engaging with the body, especially around ideas of health, healing, and how that has to do with kind of being caught up in an American culture that is really obsessed with kind of this idea of the body being really thin and really fit, and that's the way the body should be. So, I think questions of disability, questions about who fits where and why, those are kind of the things that drive me. And I think they've been driving me my whole time as a young adult in ministry, actually. This is just the place where I kind of get to sit as an introvert and just research the heck out of it and love it while I get to do it.
That's really awesome. And obviously, I mean, gosh, there's so many jumping off points on this, but clearly starting with this idea of body and embodiment is such a key piece of who we are as a people of faith anyway, right? Representing, like, we celebrate the embodiment of God, right? In the incarnation. And so just even starting there, and I think, I don't want to put words in your mouth here, but I think what I hear you saying is just the goodness of embodiment, right? Like, in I hear you saying too, like all shapes, sizes, colors, whatever it may be, right? Like there's just a kind of an, again, maybe I'm putting too many words in your mouth, but like kind of an inerrant goodness of bodies in general, which I love so much, and I feel like is such an important message for people to hear, and definitely young adults for sure, right? Because you're hearing so many things, and there's so many advertisements being thrown at you about what you should look like, right? Or how you should operate in America, especially. And gosh, I'm sure a lot of people who are going to listen to this are even just going to say, I need that. I need to be able to have a conversation about that. So friends, if you're hearing this in the collective, Alexandra's here this summer. You can reach out to Alexandra, and she would love to be a conversation partner as you're processing what does it mean to be an embodied person in this culture that continually has this like strive to like, I feel like there's like such an unrealistic expectation. You've done research on this, right? Where's that come from?
Oh, yeah.
Where's that rooted in?
Yeah, so that's, I mean,
to put you on
that's
the
a great
spot.
question. No, that's a great question. I mean, I think first off, like the kind of idea that, there is like a goodness to bodies, I think is something that Christianity in particular actually allows us to hold on to. And I think that there is kind of an underlying theology sometimes that I think kind of comes that, there are things in which the way the body is portrayed, I think particularly for many of us when we're young, around, which for those of us who are young adults isn't that long ago, right? Like purity culture and things like that. So the body is sort of, in a lot of ways demonized, right? And in an American culture with Christianity, where we're still facing a lot of conversation around sexuality and gender, there are a lot of ways that if your body doesn't fit like this really particular kind of cis, hetero, right? Like white, fit, healthy, right? I'm using healthy in quotes, just always know it's in quotes, people. If it doesn't fit that, right, you can feel really left out, and you can actually feel like something's wrong, and not just like physically wrong, but there's the thing about Christianity is it always has a moral component. And so I think recognizing the theology and the morality of like understanding your body just as it is. No changes, no improvements, no goals, no 40, whatever, right? Like nothing needs to be done. It was designed and you are living it, therefore it is good. And I actually have that as a tattoo. I literally have a tattoo that says all bodies are good bodies. So
Oh, I love
I
that.
guess you can say that I am committed to that as like a cause.
I think
so,
if you put it on your body, it pretty well means that you're committed to it.
Yes, it is. It is pretty permanent. So I would say I'm pretty committed. But I do think that that's probably the thing that I always hope to express to people is that their body as it is good and it's fine. And that
Amen.
the need to kind of perfect the body in the way that we kind of think of it in today's culture is really different from perfecting the body when we think of like, for instance, like asceticism. And so a lot of people will kind of think like, well, you've got monks who go and sit and they like don't eat for certain periods or they only eat these things. And
Yeah, just real
that
fast for those who heard that word and they're like, "What did she say? Ascet a what?" Can you break down asceticism for us real quick?
Yes, so sorry, that's not helpful at all.
That's okay. No, it is
See,
helpful. It's just I want to make sure, like, because even I have a working understanding, I think, of what I mean by it, but I want to make sure everyone's on the same page about it. So
yes, yes. See, you keep mastering things, and then you just figure out you don't know more. You just have more and more words.
Totally.
And that's honestly, that's part of that is true. I will say that, people. That is part of what's happening here. And so, yeah, asceticism is essentially this kind of movement that's happening within early Christianity through today, and it looks different throughout different periods of time. But it's essentially this focus on sort of denial and control. And typically it has to do with the body. And so it's this way of kind of showing discipline and discipleship through the denial of certain things. And usually that almost always has to do around the body. So we still practice this. Like if you have ever taken a fast, right? Over a period of time in like a prayerful way. Some people will do this kind of activity over Lent, where you'll kind of give something up for Lent, if you've ever done that. And so, I mean, there's lots of ways that this functions, but those are probably the two most common ways it functions in like kind of everyday Protestant, Orthodox, and Catholic sort of Christianity within the United States. I mean, broadly as well, but within the US especially. But I think thinking about that, there are times in which that, like all theologies, like all ideas in the church, has kind of been taken to an extreme that you could say is maybe unhelpful. So, asceticism that kind of goes to the place where you're harming yourself or you are trying to live into a standard that has nothing to do really with, your relationship with God or your relationship with your neighbor. And it has a lot more to do with meeting an expectation that's a societal one. For instance, thinness is a big one, right? Those things are actually things that we can kind of use that same kind of mentality and thought process, the logic of asceticism, but it's sort of inappropriately placed. But Christianity has been known to absorb these kind of cultural societal ideas, and then they sort of adapt them into Christian language. And that's when things can get really problematic. And so I think that sort of the language of asceticism sometimes, or the language and the logic of it, maybe is a better way to put it, it can be used to kind of justify things that actually aren't helpful or aren't healthy, because that kind of spirit of the gospel, the spirit of creation, is in fact goodness. And the kind of ways in which we watch our bodies being kind of showcased through the person of Jesus and through the kind of creation stories that we get to hold on to, it's really something that's deeply tied to the land we live on in ways that are really meaningful. And so, like, we're meant to be people who engage with the world around us, like physically, right? Like soil, trees, grass, right? There's a reason that a lot of people find nature kind of like a helpful place to go. But there's also ways in which like our bodies were never meant to all be exactly the same. God is creative. And so, we're good. We also don't have tons of descriptions of people's appearances throughout scripture, right? Like we don't actually have like, and then, they made a pencil drawing of Jesus because he was so beautiful, right? Like we don't have all of these like kind of insane focuses on appearance.
Yeah.
And that's because that's not the aim of the text that we're reading. They're not obsessed with appearance.
That's really, I've never thought about that. And yet then so often you get like, I remember one of the churches I worked at, they had like the Hall of the Apostles or whatever, and they're all like ripped, you know, and then like you have
Mm-hmm.
ripped Jesus on the cross where he's like got a six
Mm-hmm.
pack or whatever. Like, yeah, that's really fascinating that there's like you said, barely anything other than King Eglon in Judges, right? Like that there is that where they put the dagger in him and they lose the dagger because of his obesity, I think would be, or his fatness, I think is what I forget the terminology they use there, but that's the only example I can think of anybody like having looks or anything in the whole scriptures. Now obviously I don't have it all memorized, but like that's so fascinating that like there's so little, and then you have all these drawings and portraits and portrayals of these characters, and they like look jacked, right? They're like ripped.
Yeah, I mean, the kind of envisionment of the divine in Christianity, obviously this has a really long debate as to whether or not you're even supposed to do it. But if you kind of set that aside and just say, okay, well, we're doing it, what you actually are watching is really a reflection of society's ideals then being put onto the people that are being depicted. And so this is why you have a Jesus that's got like long flowing brown hair and blue eyes and is
The
clearly a
blue-eyed
white
Jesus.
dude. Yes. Like that's a reflection of what the society at the time is seeing as ideal. And so when they're imagining this like holy figure, it's actually fascinating because it's not even really a conscious decision. It's more of a like subconscious decision to be like, well, what would that person look like? And with the image is always this sort of like white dude who has this very particular appearance, you're really actually watching the reflection of like what's valued by the people who decided that was what Jesus should look like. Because like we don't know. So all of, I think that, every depiction of Jesus in some ways is equally correct. And yet we do know certain things would not have been true. Jesus would not have been white. It just was not going to be the case. And Jesus was probably not going to be blue-eyed. This probably was not the case. Now, whether or not he had flowing locks of brown hair, I don't know. But there are just things that we kind of can guess. Also, the idea that Jesus would have been this like hyper ripped figure. This is not an image that actually comes to really the American imagination until really the 70s and 80s. You're watching actually like kind of think of Arnold Schwarzenegger and the kind of, this kind of fit movement where you're actually watching different parts of culture within the United States become obsessed not just with thinness and not with just like this kind of proper American body, but all of a sudden it has to also be a fit body. And so for men, that's this kind of hyper masculinity that has to do with like building muscle and like seeing that as masculine, because muscle is not masculine. It's just part of the body's makeup. And, it also has to do obviously a lot with the control of women's bodies, probably more than anything else. There's an ideal for men, but men are allowed a lot more space for what can be attractive and what can be acceptable. Women have an extremely narrow space that they can live in. At this point in time in our society, like women are expected to be quite thin, very fit, and also to have kind of particular body dimensions to be ideal. And women are constantly being asked to somehow make all of that true at the same time, when really most of your appearance has to do with genetics. And unless you're extremely wealthy and can afford a lot of plastic surgery and things to change physically the way your genetics kind of created you, I don't know how to say this, and I'm not trying to be hurtful, but like you kind of are the way you are. And that is kind of the opposite of the like wellness kind of health industrial complex in the US, which constantly is like, actually, you have total control. In reality, you really have very little control, and you can actually let that go. I invite you sincerely to let that go and to just sort of relish the like idea of the Imago Dei, which is part of like the kind of creation theology, right? That we're all made in the image of God, that we're made in the image of the divine. That was not something that they said only was true for white cis het men who were really muscular. So there was never a mention of that. So you actually can sit quite comfortably knowing that like whatever you look like is in fact a reflection of the image of the divine. And we have been told that, and we get to sit with that. And that can always be something I think you can return to as far as the way that your kind of Christian beliefs and kind of the kind of foundations of Christian beliefs. I think the Imago Dei is one of those like core ones that everybody should keep at their foundation and could just continue to kind of get to
Absolutely.
sit
Amen.
with.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that's when I was in seminary in my systematic theology class, we had to write a credo, right? Like this huge document, like that really you couldn't have contradictions. It had to be one flow. And like, I started with theological anthropology and this idea that like, I started from there, like we're made in the image of God and like, it's a good creation, right? Like we have this divine original blessing that Matthew Fox talks about. And then Daniel Schroyer wrote a book about it too. That's just lovely. And I kind of built out from there because I think that's the core and foundation of like where I started with and felt like so often if we get that wrong, then we end up getting so many other pieces wrong along the way too. And you talked about the like, the profit that's, the complex, the wellness industrial complex, if you will, right? Like, and I know your shirt says people over profit, which I love so much. I think it's such a good like motto to live by in general. We could talk about this for a very long time, and there's so much to learn from this. One of the things I'm really curious about and would love for you to share is if I'm somebody who's doing young adult ministry, working in young adult ministry, whether that's in a congregation or in a third space. We have a lot of third space people who are part of our collective as well. So they're not specifically in a congregation, but just people engaged in young adult ministry, working with the spiritual formation of young adults. What's some good resources, or like where would you start if you're trying to figure out how do we begin to address this and how much this plays on us and how much this impacts us as individuals and then us as a congregation or as a gathering of people? Like, what are some good resources for us to begin having conversations about this?
That's a great question. The first thing is, if you're looking for something that's specifically about sort of body size or fatness, quick side note. So the fat community has reclaimed the term fat. So much like the queer community has reclaimed the term queer. So now, like, you'll find that most young people use queer without thinking about it. But if you're over the age of like maybe 50 or 60, it can be a little more like stunted. The same thing happens with fatness.
I taught a class one time and we were talking about, this was before 2019 when the United Methodist Church had that like big gathering in 2019. And I said something about like in the queer community and what, like they just all got so startled. And I was like, can you say that word? And I was like, yeah. No, we're good. We're back. We can use queer again. Queer is a good word we can use. Actually, we should probably use queer more often because it's a broader term that is going to be more incorporated. So that's helpful to bring that into the circulation and let us know that. That's very helpful. Thank you for that.
Yes. And so I think the other thing people should know is that the term, so like when you're using language in general, for most people, the term obesity is kind of seen as a slur. And so the reason
Which I just used that word. So thank you. I'm learning things right now too.
Everyone uses it. It is like, it's just kind of one of those things you have to eventually over time kind of train yourself not to do as much. The reason being that obesity is always used as a negative and it's extremely medicalized. And so when you say like, oh, well, that person is obese, you never mean anything positive by it. It is always going to be this like intentional negative towards that individual. The term fat is just a descriptor in the same way that you could be like, oh, somebody has blue eyes. They're like, oh, they're fat, but it doesn't carry a connotation to it now that it's been reclaimed by the fat community. And so like, obviously like you wouldn't use queer as a slur, you don't use fat as a slur, but you can use it as a neutral descriptor. It's always fair to ask someone what their preference would be. And so, some people may prefer like larger body, some people may prefer curvy or, whatever. So people have different preferences, but across the board within fat activism, fat is the term that's used. So anyways, that's just a side note so people don't think that I'm just sitting over here using a word that like makes them have that like gut reaction. You may still be feeling that gut reaction and that's fine, but just know that it's not actually going to be causing harm actively to fat people because we have reclaimed the term. I say this as a fat person.
That's so helpful. Yeah, that's really good.
I wanted to just share that with everyone. So resources. So I think that, of course I live mostly within the research world. So I will not go on and on about books because I realize that not everyone's me. I can't imagine it, but I have learned that not everyone also likes to read tons of books every month. So I'll keep most of that to myself. I think as far as resources that are about kind of incorporating things around the body, I think that, let me think. So there is a book that's called My Body Is Not a Prayer Request, which is about disability. And it is a great text if you've ever kind of had that kind of lingering thought of like, how do we navigate the idea of healing in bodies, or how do we navigate disability in bodies? It's written by a woman who is a wheelchair user, who is disabled and is actively like, I have people approach me when I go into Christian spaces and they're like, oh, I'm going to pray for you. And she's like, actually, I'm fine. You know, I can exist in a body that is different and actually not see it as this like negative. Disability kind of activism and fat activism share a lot of the same logic. The same is true for fat people. So the kind of book that's called Fat Church that came out, that book is also another great text if you're kind of looking for practical, but also something that's like specifically addressing the way fatness and kind of Protestant church life are connected, actually. As far as things that I think are just great resources in general that are a little bit less like, you know, like totally Christian tinge, which I highly recommend reading things outside of like just Christian living, Christian theology stuff in this area, mostly because it's not where the best or most robust material exists. The church is kind of, I think, behind really in a lot of ways in thinking about this, and thinking about a lot of these questions. And so going places outside of kind of strictly Christian spaces actually can be extremely helpful. And I urge you to kind of be willing to do that. And then to kind of use your own faith formation as a way to kind of interpret the way that you think through what these other sources and kind of other pieces of information offer you.
I love that. That's a great, yeah, that's really good.
It's just a really, I think that's just like one of the things as a young adult you're actually learning to do is to kind of take in all this outside information and suddenly like have to kind of have that kind of internal conversation about like, well, what does this mean for my faith? And I think if anyone is like feeling anxiety about that, like, I don't know how to do that, I just say welcome to the club. And like, just know that like that kind of ongoing kind of internal struggle and trying to kind of make sense of things, that is to me a big part of faith and a big part of Christian living. It's just kind of the wrestling and knowing that like, that's not something you're trying to get rid of. It's just something you can live into and kind of, I think, enjoy as a part of how actually the whole Christian thing takes place. But I think that, you know, if I was going to give one like resource that's just very kind of user friendly and like very like approachable, there is a fat activist named Aubrey Gordon, and she has a podcast called Maintenance Phase. And it is not only extremely well researched, but it is delightfully funny. There is a lot of cursing. So that is a fair warning. I will go ahead and say cursing is a thing, but it is only usually done in humor, and it is very funny. So unless that's extremely offensive to you, I highly recommend it. She also has a book that's called What We Don't Talk About When We Talk About Fat. And I think it's probably the most approachable text around fatness and understanding what the experience is like, and also why kind of anti-fat rhetoric is a problem. And it's a problem for people who aren't fat. You know, because there really is a sense of being tied, right? Like you have, I think Martin Luther King Jr. really had a great sense of this, that like you are tied to the humanity of others. So you're also tied to the places in which their humanity is being questioned. And that there truly is no freedom when we're not all free. And that like there is a sense of us all being interconnected in that way. And so if you're interested in kind of thinking through, you know, your own kind of conversation with your own body, and then also kind of putting that in a framework of people who maybe face discrimination or harassment or challenges that are even greater than maybe what you may experience. You know, people who are more obviously fat, you know, have a different experience than people who just aren't like the ideal kind of size 2 body size, or whatever it may be that you feel like is ideal.
I feel like that's such a great word of, there's a meme rolling around all over the place all the time about how Americans love to promote freedom, like, oh, freedom this, freedom that, but like how we really don't have that many freedoms, you know, like there's so many things that we are limited by, and this kind of American concept of like what the perfect body is in so many ways hindering so many people and reducing their freedom. I think that's a really helpful word and a really great framing to this, that often we don't have freedom because of that. So yeah, so thank you for that. Remind me her podcast, what was it called again, Aubrey's?
It's called maintenance phase.
Maintenance phase. Cool.
And it is very funny. I cannot recommend it enough as far as like, if you're in the car driving home and you're just looking for something that is both enjoyable and informative, you will have struck gold and you will not regret it.
Well, one of my questions was going to be if we could, if you had the opportunity to interview anybody, who would it be? And maybe she'd be a good one that we could reach out to.
If I ever got to interview Aubrey Gordon, I'm good. You can just go ahead and bury me. I'll have reached all of the things I need in life if I get to talk to Aubrey Gordon.
Well, goal set. Here we go. We have a summer to figure this out, so we can work on that. I love that. Hey, this is so awesome. So again, if you're listening to this and you want to be in conversation with Alexandra, she's around this summer. She lives in the Austin area and she's in the office one day a week right now in the 787 area there at Austin Seminary. She would love to be in conversation with you about how to implement this into the congregational life that you're doing, or just the work, again, if it's beyond congregations, how you can be in conversation with young adults about this. And so reach out to her. We'll drop her email address in the show notes, so feel free to check out there. But ultimately, we're just really thrilled to have you. And clearly you bring brilliance to this space here, and you've done a whole lot of research and a whole lot of work around this. And so we're excited to continue to pick your brain about it and continue to learn from you. Both I am, but also as the collective. And so any kind of final words or last thoughts, any hopes that you have for this summer while you're doing this with us here in the collective?
I hope that I am supportive of all the things that are already taking place and that I can just slide in. But I also think if folks were interested in connecting around conversations about embodiment and bodies and kind of the health culture of the US, health and fitness culture, if anyone really does want to have conversations about that, nothing would bring me more joy than to offer conversation around that and to offer a place of reflection for you and your work and what you do, because it's not something that's discussed that often. And I think is really, I do think it is this sort of gap that I really just sincerely have this hope one day that is in conversations and is included in the thought process around how people are being affected by Christianity and how their Christianity is actually being lived out, that I just think is really important. And as young adults, the messaging we have received, the kind of particular culture we grew up in, and sort of the for many of us, kind of that late 80s through the 90s, it's a really particular time around bodies that's actually, and especially early 2000s as well, like you have baggage. If you're a young adult, you have baggage, okay? Because people told you that Anne Hathaway was fat when she was in The Devil's Wear Prada, and nobody believes that, okay? Nobody believes that. So I just want to offer you a space to lament the fact that The Devil's Wear Prada tried to tell us Anne Hathaway was fat in 2006.
How dare they?
Also, I know, it was horrifying, okay? And then also just a space to have reflection about your own personal experiences and also the experiences of kind of what that looks like for ministry and what that conversation could look like.
So awesome. Y'all reach out to Alexandra. Again, clearly just a wealth of knowledge, information, and experience too. So we look forward to y'all connecting with her, and tune in next week. Again, we'll be back again with more on the collective voice here. And we're grateful for all who listen and are part of our collective here at 787. And as always, anything you want to reach out and be in conversation about for young adult ministry and young adult faith formation, that's what we're here for. We love to explore and hear your experiences and continue to be curious with you. So Alexandra, we're thrilled that you're here with us this summer. We look forward to more conversations, and hit her up, y'all.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Collective Voice,
the premier podcast of the 787 Collective.
Click the link in our show notes to connect with us and learn how you can be the lucky recipient of free 787 Collective swag.
And don't forget, when you rate and review us, you're tricking the algorithm for the common good.